Greetings. We as a people have faced many challenges here in America in the past. I fear our greatest challenge is before us. I'm speaking about the state of the black family. There are many factors affecting the health and state of being of our families, one of which is mass incarceration, whereby our brothers, uncles, fathers, cousins, the male members of our communities are locked away in cages. This prevents them from performing the task of providing for us, for securing the community, protecting those members of the community who need protection. They are diverted, they are distracted because they are incarcerated. We also have another factor, high divorce rates, which speaks of the lack of cohesiveness of the black man and black woman being unable to come together to solve their problems. This, of course, affects our children and their state of being. And as you can see, our children are now menaces to society. They have run amok. Lastly, our elders, the most precious and vital component in the community itself, they live among us in fear and abject terror. Our elders aren't safe among us in our own families and in our communities. When you look at the state of our family and measure or contrast it to who we were as a people before being brought to this country and even during the times on the plantation, black family communal life in Africa and in other old world cultures were a full functioning, well-oiled machine. Everything worked as it should. You have the elders who were the custodians of knowledge, the gatekeepers of traditions, which they made sure were passed down from ear to mouth, from mouth to ear, to those people who would facilitate those traditions, which would sustain the community. Community, through their rites of passage programs, made sure that the children knew their responsibilities going forward in life as members of the group. They would be tested, they would be tried, and they would fulfill these tests, and they would acquire this knowledge, and with pride and with dignity, they would fulfill their roles in society. On the plantation, interestingly, they attempted to destroy us. In 1965, Daniel P. Moynihan said in his The Negro Family in America, The Case for National Action, in this report he said, it was by destroying the Negro family that white people broke the will of the Negro people. I beg to differ. If you look on a plantation, you still had organized family units. You had the women on the plantation taking care of the babies, even if babies were snatched and taken away from their parents and shipped away to another place. When that child arrived there, you had parents, you had elder women, you had men who would take that child in and place them with the correct individual to make sure that child could grow and function as best as possible. There are a lot of misconceptions with regards to the days of enslavement. They like us to think that our ancestors were people who just were moseying along and submitting to the brutality and terror of that slave system. Nothing can be farther from the truth. It was a very dangerous time for both the slave master and the enslaved. However, families, for the most part, remained intact. People still continue to get married. And subsequently, after the Emancipation Proclamation, you could see the truth of this, because black people continue to be married after enslavement, after the Emancipation Proclamation. People continue to be married. Black two-parent families were in the upper 80 percentile range. So people were still getting married. And this occurred on up until the 21st to 20th century, when you had these thriving black metropolises all across the country. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Roseville, Florida, Slocum, Texas, to name a few. What happened to these places? They were flooded out. Some were turned into rivers. Others were burned down to the ground. There were incendiaries dropped from planes in North Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 and blowing these communities up. Some communities, black folks were run off the land by the white marauders. They were chased off, their land stolen, black folks lynched and terrorized. So this happened. However, we remained intact as a people. That's the most important part. We remained intact. And we spoke out against these crimes in many various ways. We began to fight. We began to organize ourselves. And in the 1960s, here we are, we emerged as a people, scratched, bruised. However, we still kept our eyes on the prize. We still had that objective in mind to secure ourselves, to be self-determining, to raise our children as a family, as a group, as a people. Our identity, we were structuring this identity around our families. But unfortunately, that came to a screeching halt in the 1970s. These things stopped. In the 1980s, these gains began to be reversed. And from the 1990s on up until present time, we have internalized the propaganda about ourselves. And now we have turned against ourselves and have become willing participants in our own destruction. For example, the most celebrated icon of our community is Big Mama. We all have Big Mama of Mandela. We have this Big Mama. So Martin Lawrence has a movie called Big Mama, Big Mama's House, where Big Mama is displayed in a buffoonish type scenario. She's depicted foolishly. She's overweight. She has yellow hair. She has cellulite. It's disrespectful. It's strange. It's immature. Not to mention Tyler Perry. His depiction of Medea, of Big Mama, is one of a pistol-waving, foul-mouthed, pendulous-breast woman who is aggressive, who is volatile, who is disrespectful. And at the snap of a finger, she will shoot you. This is not the Big Mama we know. In fact, the Big Mama we know was a nurturer. Big Mama we know is embedded within the structure of our families, going back to Africa, to those ancient, old, matriarchal systems. But we've strayed away from this. So what must we do? We must begin to engage ourselves in a self-healing practice through our cultural traditions. We must return to those old moral precepts, those old moral values. We must begin to lean on our elders and talk to them. We must ask the proper questions. What went wrong? And we must move to correct those actions. We must talk with our children. We need to turn off the TV, social media. We must begin to talk to one another again. We must begin to establish ourselves again like we once did. We must begin to create systemic processes to ensure this healing. I mentioned earlier about the rites of passage. We as men must take our young folks aside and we must instill those values and we must instill those traditions in them which will make them full functioning human beings. And women should do the same with young ladies. We've allowed social media to raise our children. You know, there's a book called A Brave New World, published back in the 1920s by Aldous Huxley. In this Brave New World, he stated that children were desensitized to death and they were raised in state-run conditioning centers. That's the modern day latchkey. That's the modern day daycare centers, summer camps. Actually, it's the schools. The schools are state-run conditioning centers. We must take back our power and give our children our values and traditions. We must take control of their lives and begin to give them directions because we've seemed to have lost control of them. We must rule over them from the perspective of love and compassion and to raise them to be the gatekeepers of our welfare and well-being for the future. So in closing, I would like to say that if we don't change the direction we're headed, we are going to get to where we're going. It doesn't look pretty. And not only for black families, but for America in general, with the current events that's happening, with food shortages, with imminent wars, catastrophic world wars that may include nuclear projectiles. So I'm saying, spend time with your family. Let's get together and solve these problems. No one is going to solve them for you. We are our own saviors. Until the next time, peace and blessings.